So we've been going through, we're on week 3. I said this is going to be a 5-week series. It's become a 6-week series because we're going through the 12 steps of recovery, and we're looking at the 12 steps of recovery as what they are, which is a process of biblical repentance and transformation. And we're looking at, again, whether we're in recovery or out of recovery, what truths we can glean from that as far as the process of change is concerned in our lives. So we had said that we condensed, remember the 12 steps, we condensed them into 5, and we've been calling them steps, and it's very confusing because it's like, are we talking about the 12 steps or the 5 condensed steps? So here's what I came up with this week. We've got the 12 steps, and we have the 5 phases, the 5 action phases, because there's a lot of the steps that really can be condensed to one action step, if you will. So of those 5 phases, we're on the 3rd one of those, week 3. And here's what I want to point out. We, at this point, have taken the first 3 steps, but we have yet to really take an action step, so to speak. The first 3 steps, let me read them real quick. We admitted we were powerless. We talked about that the first week. Coming to a place of powerlessness. Coming to the end of my confidence in my ability to be able to fix my problem, to be able to improve my situation. Then step 2, last week we talked about steps 2 and 3. We came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. So we came to begin to seek for help outside of ourselves because I don't have the solution, so maybe you have the solution. Yeah. I'm willing to throw myself on that. And then step 3, we then, based out of that, we called it that desperation that the circumstances of our life has yielded in our lives, we said that then we're now willing to submit to the process. I used the example, remember, of having cancer and going to a doctor. I come to the end of my ability to deal with this situation. I break through denial. I do have this issue. I can't fix it. So what do? I go to a doctor. I start seeking outside opinions, seeking outside help. And then I come to a place where, driven by desperation, because I can't fix this, I've come to that point. I can't fix this, so now I'm willing to undergo your prognosis, your treatment. I'm willing to do what you say, cast myself on your will, submit my will to your will, in hopes that you can fix something that I can't. That's the first 3 steps of recovery, right? Now, at that point, here's what I want us to see. We haven't really done anything. The first 3 steps are all about just coming to the place where we're willing to do something. We haven't started working on ourselves. We haven't really changed anything at that point. We've just come to a place where we're willing to begin the process. And that is what the first 3 steps are all about. And so, this week, we start on step 4. We begin the work of the process. And here's the deal. Going forward begins with looking back. I titled this sermon this week, Ready, Set, Reverse, because that's a lot what it feels like when you start walking out the steps of recovery. And guys, I hate even saying recovery because I know we have a mixed audience. Some people are in recovery, some aren't. And I'll just say I've spent years not in recovery, and there were so many truths of recovery that my life was desperately needing. And so if we're new here this morning, I just want to say, guys, we've got to come to a place of recognizing that these steps are not somebody's idea that they just dreamed up. These steps are deeply rooted in the biblical process of change that often in the church we've neglected. I know y'all heard me say that a million times, but it's true. So looking back, step 4, we made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. Now, this is the dreaded step. Everybody dreads this step because this step involves dealing with the past. This step involves looking at all of those things that we've said. What have we said? Let sleeping dogs lie. Leave the past in the past. I'm just going to move on. I'm just going to forget about it. We're just going to move on. But here's the problem. The past doesn't like to stay in the past, does it? No. The past, whether we realize it or not, we're going to talk about this today some, the past keeps influencing the present. And so a lot of us are walking out and we're trying hard to be the Christians that we should be. We're trying hard to be the parents we should be, live the lives we should lead. But there's things in the past that are preventing us from doing so. And we have a mentality of, let sleeping dogs lie, leave the past in the past. We're just going to move forward. We're going to forget about that. We're just going to move on. But until it's dealt with, it's not gone. I thought of an example of this week. When I was probably 12 or 13, I got into bow hunting. I love bow hunting. I was passionate about bow hunting all growing up. I don't really have as much time for it these days, but I've done a lot of it. And anybody in here who's been around archery at all has heard this. The most important part of your shot is your release. There you go. Michael, where were you on that one? Oh, okay, right, yeah. Acceptable excuse. The most important part of your shot is your release. And here's why. Because it doesn't matter where you aim. If your release is bad, you will not make contact with your intended target, your intended destination. So my aim can be perfect, my form can be good, but if my release is bad, the arrow is not going to fly true to my intention. I'm going to end up off course. And the same is true with us, guys. If we ignore the past and we are trying to start out on this new journey, start out on this new thing, but we don't deal with the past, we don't dig into that, then we're going to fly different. That is going to cause drag on us, and we are not going to end up at our intended destination. That's why this fourth step is so important. This is where the process of transformation really begins. And let me ask you this. In Hebrews 8, we see, y'all probably could quote me this, we see that God has forgotten our sins, that he remembers them no more, right? But let me ask you this. How did he do that? God did not forget our sins and remember them no more by ignoring them. He remembers them no more because he dealt with them on the cross. So God addressed the past. He addressed our sin on the cross so that he could then move forward, forgetting them and remembering them no more, right? And that's the same model that we have to follow. And that's what this fourth step's all about. So, okay, so going back to our first three, we recognize our need. We look outside of ourselves for help. We begin to surrender. We come to a place of being willing to surrender our will. Now, where we're at right there, the place we've come to is what we see in 2 Corinthians chapter 5. Verse 16, Paul here says, "At one time, we thought of Christ merely from a human point of view. How differently we know him now. This means that anyone who belongs to Christ has become a new person." A bunch of us probably know this verse. "The old life is gone, a new life has begun." And all of this is a gift from God who brought us back to himself through Christ. So here's what I see here. We may not feel like a new work. We may not look like a new work yet. But here's what he's saying. A new life has begun. Life is not a momentary thing. It is a journey. What he's saying is a new work, a new process, a new life has begun. And I like that. A new work has begun. This is where we're at. God has made us, we've come to the point of submitting our will. We talked about last week how those first three steps are also a picture of salvation, that we come to a place of, all right, God, I'm going to set out on this new path. And so the Bible's describing this new work has begun. And here's the deal. The first step of this new work becomes a purge. Any of you guys that have maybe done a diet, maybe you've done a purge for the first week where you're flushing out all the toxins that you've been consuming. Any of you guys that are in recovery programs, very likely you went through detox, right? Yeah. You spent time at the first part of this new journey purging yourself of the toxins that were in your body, right? Yeah. And the same thing is true of this new work. I think about a splinter. You've gone through something. Maybe you've been through an accident, or maybe you've been out working in the barn and you've picked up, while you were in that phase, that place, you've picked up foreign material and it's in your skin, right? You've got toxins in your body. And what does your body do? How does your body respond to that? Your body starts to cause pain, one. That's the first thing that happens. You start to feel pain. And what is that? That's your body saying, hey, you've got an issue here that needs to get addressed. You've got something here that's not going to go away. And the second part of it is that you begin to have, it begins to swell up, right? And cause a pustule. And your body is trying to push this foreign material out of itself so that it can function properly. And so often, guys, our life is full of pain and swollen areas, and it's our life telling us. It's what Galatians describes when it talks about the law of sowing and reaping. It's saying, hey, there's something wrong here. There's something planted here that's not right, and we need to do some work. We need to start digging into this. We need to get the needle and tweezers out and go to work on this Because it's not just going to go away. We have to deal with it to move forward in a healthy way. So that is the first step that we begin in this new journey, in this new work, in this new life that Paul has described. And so here's the purge process. The purge process is two things. It is intentional introspection. In the fourth step there, we see this called an inventory. So it's introspection. You don't accidentally undergo introspection, right? You purposefully begin an introspective process in your life. So introspection and conviction. Those are the two forces at work in this purge process. We're going to talk about both of these. I want us to look at Psalms 139:23. David gives us a great picture of the heart behind what we're doing here. He says, "Search me, O God, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts. Point out in me anything that offends you and lead me along the path of everlasting life." Why do I want you to do this? Because I'm sick of the way my way, I'm sick of where my way has led me. I'm sick of the fruit my way has produced in my life. Yeah. So this is this inventory process. All right. So let's talk about introspection, this inventory. A few things I want to say about that. One thing that we're doing here, one end goal of performing this introspection, this inventory, is to find what's working and what isn't. If we think about a businessman taking stock of his inventory, what's he doing there? He's looking to see what products have been selling that need restocked. What things have been working? Let's keep putting those on the shelves. The second thing he's doing, he's going, what has not been selling? What product has not been moving? Maybe we need to consider switching our inventory because this is not selling. So that's one purpose of the inventory, and that is walking out. I mentioned it earlier, Galatians chapter 6, where it says, don't be deceived. God isn't mocked. We read this all the time. What you sow is what you will reap, right? We talk about seed and the fruit that it produces in our life all the time. So here's the deal, guys. Here's what this first thing I'm saying is, if you are happy with your harvest, then definitely keep planting those seeds. They're selling. It's working. Keep planting those seeds. But when you look in your life and you see areas where you are unhappy with your harvest, it's time to question that stock. Let's quit planting that seed. So that's the first thing. That's one of the things that we're doing in this inventory. So we're looking for what is selling and what is not. All right? Another thing I want to say about this. Another part of this inventory. Everybody gets, when they read the fourth step, everybody understands that we are doing what does it say? A moral inventory. So we are looking at our past to take responsibility for our actions. We all get that one. But here's one that a lot of times we miss and we leave out in our work of the fourth step, is that it's not just an inventory of our choices. It's also an inventory of others' choices and the impacts that had on us, right? It's also looking back and saying, man, how did that trauma affect me? Because you know what? Others can plant seeds in our lives too. We can plant seeds, for sure, and we do with our actions, choosing to believe the thing that, we can plant seeds. But the Bible even has a parable where somebody from outside, a thief, a bad person, comes in and plants seed in with the good crop. And a lot of times, as children, walking through things, trauma that we've experienced, whatever it is, it's planted seeds that we didn't plant, and so we're a lot of times not even aware that it's there. We're not aware of how it's affecting us. And part of this inventory becomes taking stock of that too. So it's both. I want us to see that. And it's at this step, guys, that we really walk out. How many of you guys have heard us in group talk about the importance of lies and truth in our behavior? Yeah, we talk about it all the time. Well, guess what? It's at this step that we do that we always are teaching you guys, that we begin to unearth the lies that we've believed that have promoted the behavior that we've lived with, the choices that we've made. This is the step where it happens. And here's the last thing I want to say about introspection. It's important that we get this. It's not just about coming to understand what we did, which everybody gets that. It's coming to understand why we did what we did, why we've become the person with the attitudes and beliefs and behaviors that we've become. Why becomes very important. Why is what we desperately need to understand to be able to begin to change moving forward. All right, let's move on and talk about conviction now. I have a few things. We're going to camp on conviction for a minute because there's a lot of misunderstanding about conviction. The first thing I want us to see is that we all understand conviction in terms of God convicting us of sin. Anybody that's been in church one day in their lives probably understands that. But here's the deal, guys. Conviction is certainly about God convicting us of sin. We certainly see that. But conviction also becomes what we would technically term revelation. God can also convict me. David, do you realize what you believe about me or yourself or others? Do you realize how that event affected you and the lies that it planted? So conviction, seeking God's conviction, is not just about seeking God to tell you what a bad boy you've been. It's also about helping you to see truth. Revelation of truth is a form of conviction, and we need to see that. Here's the second thing I want to say about conviction. We have to understand the difference between conviction and condemnation. Conviction, the result of conviction, y'all hear me, the result of conviction is never shame. And we blur the lines here. God, I'm just going to say this, God never intends for you to feel ashamed. The point of conviction is never to make you feel really bad about yourself. That is condemnation, and that is from the enemy. And here, Romans 8. Let me read this real quick. Romans 8. It says, there is no condemnation for those who belong to Christ Jesus. And because you belong to him, the power of the life-giving Spirit has freed you from the power of sin that leads to death. So, there is no condemnation. Condemnation is not from God. And so here's the thing, and this is why it's really dangerous. Conviction inspires us towards change. What condemnation does is it produces shame, and what shame does is it prevents us from continuing in the process that will lead to change. Because we're going to talk about this next week, the mandated response to conviction in our lives becomes confession to God and others. That's how we deal with conviction. That's how we process through conviction in a healthy way, leading to a good result. But what do we do when we feel shame? We pull away. We hide. We pull back from the light. We isolate. Thank you. We don't press forward with the process. So Satan works very hard to insert his partial truth that sounds and looks a little bit like God. That boy, isn't he always doing that? Isn't he always taking God's truth and just twisting it just slightly enough that we don't notice it, but then it produces death instead of producing life? And so here's the thing, guys. Now, what do we do with this? Because you know what? Man, some of us in here, actually, let me reframe that. All of us in here have done some really bad stuff, if we're going to be very honest, right? So when we start unpacking that, when we start digging back into that, man, shame's right there. It's right there, and man, it's hard to see around it. And here's what I want to tell you guys. This is where it becomes so important that we understand the truths that we always are talking about in here, about who we are in Christ, what God's heart. This is why we spent 2 weeks talking about God's love for us. Because until we understand that, we're never going to be able to get past shame towards a good part of the problem. We're always going to own shame. I thought about it like this week. A lot of us have grown up around here. You get out in these woods, and man, it's just big old briar patches, right? Just green briars, you can't even push through them. And if you've been in that, you know what I'm about to talk about. If you go in there and you're wearing, let's say, a flannel fuzzy jacket, every one of those briars is going to grab you with a death grip, and you are not getting through that briar patch. Am I right? It's not going to happen. Now, by contrast, if you go in there wearing some really good, heavy-duty, Carhartt type material, that those briars, they can't get a hold of it. And you can what? You can just push right through that stuff. It can't grab you. It just slides right by. And that is a great picture of what this is, guys. When we put on the full armor of God, when we understand who we are as his children, when we understand his heart for us, when we surround ourselves with others that help us, encourage us in that, we've put on that Carhartt thing, and here's the deal. The shame's still there, but it can't sink its briars into us. It can't get a hold of us. We can push on through it. We can say, no, that is not true. We can see we can take responsibility for what we need to take responsibility for, and we can push aside the shame that the enemy tries to lay on top of all of that and push through that briar patch. If we go in this not understanding those things, then every one of those little barbs is going to sink into our clothing, and we're going to get hung up in the briar patch, and we're not going to be able to get through this mess of the decisions we've made, right? And so I don't know if I'm making this very clear, guys, but listen, conviction says you're guilty. Conviction says you're guilty of this, and I need you to understand that you're guilty of this so that I can help you change. It says you did this. You did it, and you need to own it. That's what conviction says. Condemnation says you are shameful. It says you are this. It says you didn't just do this. This is who you are, and you should be ashamed, and you should hide, and you don't even deserve to change. And it sets us on two very different paths. So don't confuse the two. And as you begin walking out this process, I know this is so easy to say. Don't buy the enemy's lies. Shame does not come from God. And I mean, if you want to go off and eat it, if you want to go off and take hold of it and own it, all right, but it's not from God. And He's not asking you to pick it up. So what does this practically look like? Introspection, conviction, walking out this process. I have a couple things I want to share with you that I found this week that I thought were really good. The first thing is that we've got to become very good at distinguishing, as far as our choices are concerned, between what we are responsible for and what we are not responsible for. And I've got 3 questions that we need to ask ourselves with regard to every event as we begin to process through this. 3 questions we need to be asking. The first is, what responsibility do I have leading up to the event? The second is, what responsibility do I have in my response to the event? And then the third is, how did the event affect me? Now, let me give us an example here. Let's say I'm looking at my past. I'm beginning this step 4. I'm beginning this introspective process and seeking God's conviction, as David said, hey, please convict me of truth about myself. Let's say I look into my past. Let's say I had a spouse, an ex-spouse that cheated on me. Okay? Now, here's what this looks like. Question 1. I did not cause them to do that. I did not force them. That was their decision. They made that decision. I don't have responsibility for that decision. But here's what we like to do a lot of times. We zoom in so much on one thing that we also don't take responsibility for our part in surrounding events. So guess what we do? We just drag that same bad seed into the next relationship or into the next job or into the next whatever it is. And we just end up just transplanting bad seed all throughout our lives. And I see really severe examples of this in jail where it's always someone else's fault. And we can just sit here and talk about this event all day long. And then I go, well, is this your first time in jail? Well, no. Well, what was it last time? And you start to pick the trend. It's like, are you seeing that there are things that I need to take responsibility for if I'm going to experience change in my future? So here's the deal. So what responsibility do I have leading up to the event? I didn't cause the event. I don't have to take responsibility for the event. But before the event happened, what can I maybe own up to? What can I maybe take responsibility for that I did do? Maybe I was emotionally distant. Maybe I come to see that, you know what, I was actually verbally abusive, or I was selfish. Now, does that justify their decision? No, it doesn't justify their decision, but it does help me to see truth about myself, which helps me change. So, now, let's look at after the event. What responsibility do I have in my actions after the event? Did I go out there and decide to have an affair on them to get back at them? Did I just throw myself into the bottle? What decisions did I make in response to the event? Again, I'm not responsible for the event, but they, turning the coin here, they didn't force me to go do the things that I did. They did not force, so I have to take responsibility for those things. Okay, what can I take responsibility for there? So do you see what I'm saying here? We're looking at both sides of the event, and I'm looking at what can I take responsibility for. God, what truth can you reveal to me about my contribution to this mess? And then here's the third one. How did that event affect me? what lies did I carry forward? What wounds did I carry forward in my heart? Because again, this isn't this introspective process. It's not just about looking at what we have to take responsibility for. It is that. It's also, how did others' choices impact me? So you know what? Maybe God leads me to see that, you know what, after that, I came to believe you couldn't trust other people. You couldn't trust men. You couldn't trust women. And maybe after that, because what do we always say? Belief becomes behavior. So maybe after that, every relationship since then I've been unwilling to actually engage in. I've started to just have superficial relationships. Yeah. And it traces back to this lie that I believe about this event. And so as we begin to process through our past, using these questions as a guide, what we start to do is we start to push all the junk, all the fog, all the clutter out of the way and get down to what really happened and allow God to begin to show us truth about, okay, yeah, I did this and I can change that. And you know what? I believed this and it wasn't entirely true. And we begin to process our past in a way that helps us to heal now and move forward as God did, saying, I've forgotten it. It really is behind me. It's not influencing my present now. So this boils down to recognizing the impact of others' choices while taking responsibility for my choices. I know I'm beating this to death. Let's look at Galatians 6, 3 through 5. It says, if anyone thinks that they are something, doesn't matter what, if anyone thinks they are something, when they are not that thing, they deceive themselves. Each one should test their own actions. Then they can take pride in themselves alone without comparing themselves to someone else. For each one should carry their own load. Oftentimes, guys, what we end up doing, if we're unwilling to walk through this process, if we're unwilling to take this step, what we end up doing, I know we've all seen this, maybe we've been this, is the image we have of ourselves, the person that we believe that we are, we don't look at the fruit of our lives to confirm it, because to walk out this process would contradict it. So what we often do, I see this all the time, so we end up subconsciously doing what he's talking about right here. We end up confirming our opinion about ourselves by comparing ourselves to others. So so let's say maybe I'm not a good father because I'm actually looking at, does my life reflect that truth? I'm a good father because I'm better than my father. I'm better than my cousin's father. I'm not a good parent because, I just did that. I'm not a good spouse. I'm not a good spouse because I'm looking at the actual fruit of my life to confirm that or contradict it. I look at, how do I compare to those around me? Now, here's the problem with that, is that becomes an incredibly bad metric, because what people subconsciously do is we surround ourselves, we don't even realize we're doing it, but we surround ourselves with people that make us look good and that confirm our opinion about ourselves. Yeah. I see it all the time. We don't surround ourselves with people that challenge the incorrect opinion or belief that we have about ourselves. We surround ourselves with people that confirm it. And so guess what we do? We just go on, as he said right here, we go on deceiving ourselves. We end up committing extrospection instead of introspection. Now maybe, for some of us, if you're like me, there's plenty of actions going on in your life that are easy enough to go ahead and start digging into. Lots of problems sticking out all over your life that you just can't really hide or get around. And so, easy enough. Let's start there. But for some of us, some people, I don't really understand exactly how they manage it, but they seem to keep their lives contained enough that they maybe don't have some glaring issue in their lives. I don't understand that. I've never been able to achieve that, but some people seem to. And so here's the deal. If you're one of those people, this process is still for you, because start with your attitudes. I saw this week, and I really liked this. Usually our attitudes are the driving force behind our behaviors. I think of it like this. Belief will become attitude, and attitude of our heart will then become the behavior or the action in our life. So here's the deal. Maybe the attitude of your heart in a certain area hasn't quite made its way into action yet. But here's the deal. I love this. Let me read a couple verses real quick before I move on, because this is not a new thing. This is what Jesus said. Matthew 5, verse 21 in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus said, You have heard it was said to people long ago, you shall not murder, and anyone who murders will be subject to judgment. But I tell you that anyone who is angry with a brother or sister will be subject to judgment. Verse 27 through 28, he says, you've heard that it was said, you shall not commit adultery. But I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. So what God is saying, what God is pointing out here is that, look, I know that action, I know that belief, that attitude will become behavior. So I'm not all that caught up with the behavior. I'm much more interested in the condition of your heart because I know that's what the behavior is going to come out of. Let's fix that. Mark 7 says the same thing in verse 14. It says, then Jesus called to the crowd to come and hear. All of you listen, he said, and try to understand. And try to understand. All right, we'll try. It's not what goes into your body that defiles you. You're defiled by what comes from your heart. Yeah. Skipping down to verse 20, he says, and then he added, it is what comes from inside that defiles you. For from within, out of a person's heart, come evil thoughts, sexual immorality, theft, murder, adultery, greed, wickedness, deceit, lustful desires, envy, slander, pride, and foolishness. All these vile things come from within. They are what defile you. So here's the deal, guys. This introspective process, it really gets down to the heart. So again, even if you're not somebody that goes, oh yeah, I see sexual immorality all over my life. Even if that's not you, well, let's start looking at the attitudes because attitudes become the X marks the spot on the map of let's start digging here. And I saw this exercise I'd like to share with you, and it's let's look at the fruit of the Spirit. The Bible has the fruits of the Spirit, the fruit of the Spirit of truth, the fruit of the Spirit of life. And you'll see that most of these are attitudes. You've got love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. As we begin to walk out God's truth, this will be the fruit of it in our lives, right? That's what it's saying. Now, draw the opposite of those things. So I just took some shots in the dark here, add your own, but the opposite of love, bitterness, resentment, hate. The opposite of joy, depression, cynicism. The opposite of peace, anxiety, fear. The opposite of patience, impatience, irritability, dissatisfaction. The opposite of kindness, suspicion, mistrust, goodness, selfishness, defensiveness. The opposite of faithfulness, being self-centered. The opposite of gentleness, anger, aggression, harshness. The opposite of self-control, self-indulgence, being impulsive in our decisions. So here's the deal. If you're drawing a blank, start here. Start looking at your life and asking God to help reveal to you. Because what you'll find is there's going to be some generic attitudes that just sort of permeate your life. For some people, they're just generally kind of cynical. And they'll usually admit that. Yeah, I'm kind of a cynic. Or maybe it's mistrust. Or maybe it's, bitterness or resentment towards a certain person or a certain people group. Or whatever, So start looking at your life and looking for these attitudes that are sort of an aroma of your life. And what those become is an X marks the spot. It becomes that swelling, that pain that's saying, hey, there's a splinter here that needs to get dealt with. And if we don't deal with it, sooner or later, that attitude will end up becoming action in our life. Yeah. That seed will start to bear fruit. And so I really like this exercise, and I think this would be so great for any of us to do, to begin to seek God and begin to look in our lives introspectively. Again, you don't do it by accident. To begin to intentionally look and say, where am I experiencing the opposite of the fruit of the Spirit? Where am I experiencing the fruit of the flesh? And that becomes where we start digging, where we start the process of that introspection, where we start to go, what's behind this, God? What's causing this? What got me, what's in my past that this is coming out of? And we start to walk through those questions and we start to dig into it. Yeah. This is how healing and transformation occur. In the church, it's like, oh, Jesus saves, all of these promises we have. And if you're like me, spend a lot of time in church and just kind of been like, boy, healing and transformation are kind of just this vague thing, like if I just go enough and if I just read my Bible enough, those things will kind of happen in my life. And then it doesn't. It's because I'm not walking out the truth of what God has said, and that's what I'm showing you today, because this is where change begins. I want to look at two verses here in closing. Romans 12:2, it says, do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed, how? By the renewing of our mind. That's what I'm describing to you today. This is how we renew our mind. By the renewing of our mind, then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. And then 2 Corinthians 10, 3 through 5, for though we live in the world, we do not wage war as the world does. The weapons we fight with are not the weapons of the world. On the contrary, they have divine power to demolish strongholds. How do they demolish these strongholds? We demolish arguments and every pretension that sets itself up against the knowledge, the truth of God. We take captive every thought to make it obedient to Christ. That's what we're talking about today. This is how we do that. In closing, guys, what we're doing here as we inventory our past, as we take responsibility for our mistakes, and as we recognize the impact of others on us, what we're doing is we're beginning a process I call a relentless pursuit of truth. Because here's the deal. Jesus said, truth. He says, when you come to know the truth, he says, if you continue in me, if you continue in my word, you will come to know the truth, and the truth will set you free. So as God begins to lead us into truth about why we are the way we are, why we struggle with the things we struggle with, what beliefs are fueling that, as we begin to come into truth about those things, we begin to actually, the shackles really do start to fall. And that's something that we've sought for so long. And this is where it happens, guys. And you know what? This is why in this church we make freedom groups a big deal. It's why we do them. It's why we're going to keep doing them. Yeah. Because that's exactly what you're doing in freedom groups. You are walking out step 4. You are sitting down with a group of other people, and you are digging into your past, and you are taking responsibility for things that you've done. And you are digging into things that others have done and how it's affected you. Man, how has the sexual trauma in my past affected me? Man, how has these incredibly discouraging, disappointing moments in my life when, my husband left me, my this, my that, how has that affected me? That's what we're doing in freedom groups. We're providing you a place to walk out this process with others. We're going to talk about others' role in this next week. One last thing. Revelation, guys, this process, it's not a step. It's not something you're going to check the box and be done with. It's progressive. It's just, I think about you've got a pile of garbage in your past. Some of the trash bags you threw there, some of the trash bags others threw there. But you've got a big pile of garbage and it's creating stench in your life, right? And the only way to deal with it is to start dealing with it one bag at a time. You can't get it all dealt with all at once. And maybe you're not ready to deal with that bag. Maybe that bag's a little big and a little too stinky. So, all right, well, let's start with this bag. And we open that bag up. We start going through it and dealing with it. And guess what? The pile is not gone, but it's one bag less. And we just keep going through this process, and we keep going through this process. That's why we're going to keep offering freedom groups of different types, because maybe, okay, I dealt with that bag of trash. Now I need to deal with this bag of trash, and that's a different topic. But as we keep dealing with these bags of trash, the pile gets a little smaller, and you know what? The stink that's permeating our life gets a little less and a little less. And so I want to challenge you guys. Again, introspection happens with intent. I challenge you guys to, like David, to start seeking God's conviction. In church, a lot of times, we sort of act like God's conviction is just something that happens to us when we mess up. We touched the stove and it burned us type of thing. But we just go through life doing life kind of our way, trying our best to do it God's way, and then he kind of knocks us upside the head when we do it wrong. That's kind of how we look at conviction. But conviction, as David modeled there when he said, hey, reveal to me, God, the condition of my heart. Conviction is something we have to seek with intent. Step 4 is not something that just happens. We seek it with intent. And here's the deal, guys, especially for those of us who've been in church a long time. When was the last time that you actually sought God? That you actually were like, God, reveal to me the true condition of my heart. Reveal to me the things that I haven't taken ownership for. Show me truth about myself. When was the last time we sought conviction with intent, as opposed to just sort of waiting for it to happen whenever God doesn't like what we did? We got to start seeking it, guys. And the Bible says that he who knocks, the door will be open, and he who seeks will find it. If we're not knocking, if we're not seeking, if we're not asking him for it, he's not going to force us to go through this. And when we become a Christian, that bag of trash doesn't go away either. A lot of times we have that in church. When you become a Christian, he never once in his word said that he would take that pile of trash away. What he said is that after that, in becoming a Christian, he has now equipped us with the ability to deal with that pile of trash. But it is the work that must be done. And we can sit around and wait for a flash of light to change everything, or we can get to work. All right. This is how change happens, guys. I want to close this in prayer.